This episode of RealAg Radio is brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 here on Sirius XM a big part of your workday. And a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Remember, tell your friends, your family, anybody you know that is interested in agriculture. We are their one-stop shop for ag information. So please spread the good word. You're helping us out there. Absolutely. It's Agronomic Monday today on the show, so we're going to cover all things agronomy. We're going to hear a conversation that Kara Oosterhuis had in a recent school episode, talking to Lyle, Jensen of AgroPlus, looking at scouting for grasshoppers in the seed row. Grasshoppers, they are predicted to be quite bad this year on the parts of the prairies for sure. And based on that, we're also going to play for you a piece of one of the new Pest and Predator Podcast episodes that went live. And it's a great conversation with Dr. James Tansey, Dr. John Gavloski, and Dr. Shelley Barkley. So we have a provincial specialist in each of the provinces on the prairies, and we talk about some of the forecast for 2023 when it comes to insects, and specifically about grasshoppers. And did any of the winter conditions lead to a change in the prediction of the populations of grasshoppers here during the growing season years? So you're not gonna want to miss that for sure. And then Peter Pete Johnson will be here, and I got a bunch of questions for him as well. And he'll of course bring all the energy that Pete always does. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. We're on all of them. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as TikTok. The other way you can get a hold of me is called the RealAg feedback line. Now, we're not going to put you on the air live. This is super easy. You dial the number, press the number 3, and then you leave me a voicemail, and I get it. Okay, so it's very, very simple. You just gotta make a phone call. 855-776-6147. A lot of talk shows, you call in, and you got to wait on hold for like an hour to 2 hours to talk on the air for like 30 seconds. Who has time for that? Not you. So this is a very simple system we put up. You just dial 855-776-6147, press the number 3, and you get to leave a message. So please do that. We have a new poll up at realagriculture.com. Fun one, as always. It goes back to, it was on the Farmer Rapid Fire a few weeks back, talking about, if money was no object, what next piece of equipment would you buy? So very simple stuff. You can vote for tillage equipment, haying equipment, bin, sprayer, combine, of course, or a planter or seeder. Go to realagriculture.com and vote now, and we'll discuss the results throughout the week. Last week in the Farmer Rapid Fire, we asked farmers if, which is brought to you by Pioneer Seeds Canada, by the way. We asked all the farmers if they would watch the coronation that happened on Saturday. I caught a blip of it. I caught when they came out on the terrace at Buckingham Palace. That's about when I turned on the TV on Saturday morning. And so I did catch that. I definitely did not wake up at whatever time, 4:00 Eastern, to watch some of the ceremony at Westminster Abbey. So I missed that part of it. But the sounds of it, none of our farmers were going to watch it either. So that's done. Now we move forward. It did give the networks a lot to talk about on Saturday during all the news shows, for sure. And as you heard on Friday's show, we had a lot of talk and fun about sports and the hockey playoffs. Edmonton came out to play. Vegas did not. So that series is now 1-1. And unfortunately for the Toronto Maple Leafs, it was a very difficult weekend. Yesterday, boy, when the Stars don't come out to play, Toronto was very average. And that was quite unfortunate. I caught parts of that game. I was going back and forth between that and the Suns Nuggets game, and I'll tell you that if you like basketball, check out that Suns Nuggets series. It is amazing. Durant, Booker, Joker, it's loaded with stars. They hit the 120s last night, and there was good defense. Guys were hitting shots from everywhere. It was really, really fun to watch. So yeah, anyway, okay, let's park the sports. Let's get to the agronomy. That's what you're telling me. Let's do that. But first, we have to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to hear from 3 provincial entomologists, and we're going to learn what they think about 2023 when it comes to the forecasts. You're listening to RealAg Radio here on this Monday.
It is time for today's product spotlight. Joining me on the line is Roger Gunning with US Borax. So what's something that growers in North America don't necessarily think about when it comes to their fertilizer?
There could be heavy metals like arsenic and fertilizers that have not gone through the stringent refining process. It is well known that arsenic can be toxic to plants as well as animals. If you have a high level of arsenic in your fertilizer and you don't know it, it will accumulate in the soil, and then it'll be taken up in your crops. Refined borates, like those we sell here at US Borax, go through a 7-step process to help ensure at the end our product is pure.
How then can growers get more information if they want to know more about US Borax?
Definitely take a look at our website, agriculture.borax.com, or give me a phone call, 773-923-7420.
All right, Roger, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
Can't believe we talked about sports in the opening segment, and we didn't even mention the fact the Blue Jays swept the Pirates. Yes, we've already forgotten about the fact that the Red Sox dominated us the middle of last week, and Blue Jays went to Pittsburgh, and they got out the brooms, and they dominated Pittsburgh. Dominated. Great to see. Blue Jays looking good. I think they're the 4th best record in the league, and they're 3rd in the American League East. Yikes. Anyway, it's going to be a fun season. And I'm sure you're enjoying those games as you're trying to get the crop in the ground. Baseball on the radio there's nothing else like it. Hey, this segment's brought to you by Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. That is Granubor from US Borax. Go to borax.com. Okay, we have this podcast at RealAgriculture.com. It's called the Pest and Predator Podcast. It's brought to you by Field Heroes, which is powered by the WGRF. Big thanks to WGRF for being a sponsor of this kind of content. We're in the 4th season. We really tend to focus on beneficial insects. On a recent episode, I had a chance to talk to 3 provincial entomologists, really truly experts in their fields. James Tansey, John Gavloski, and Shelley Barkley joined me, all on one podcast. Yes, let's listen to what they have to say about what we can expect in 2023. Okay, let's take a look ahead here to 2023. Jim, let's start with you. What are you expecting when it comes to the population loads and some of the issues that farmers are going to have to be aware of when it comes to pests and predators for 2023?
Well, I think the one that's front of mind for everyone is grasshoppers right now. Given the heavy populations that we saw in central and southern regions. I mean, John did mention the cool, wet spring and some of the delays, and that seems to have suppressed some of the grasshopper populations in eastern portions of as particularly northeastern portions of of Saskatchewan's growing regions. But we had really terrific conditions for egg laying for grasshoppers in July and August, and really that's when it matters. So dry to very dry conditions in central and southern regions. That and the correlation of that with really heavy populations. So a lot of opportunity for boy to meet girl and for those eggs to go into the ground. So
does a cool, like we're kind of looking here a bit of a late spring because Mother Nature just wants February to continue into April, it seems. Does that cool spring help us when it comes to grasshopper loads for the season?
It can delay their development. They overwinter as eggs. So we, in Saskatchewan at any rate, we've got 4 primary pests, and they all overwinter. Grasshopper pests, pardon me, and they all overwinter as eggs in a state that's called diapause. So it's a state of arrested development, and their development is dictated by temperature, but they can hunker down. They are native to the prairies and pretty cold resilient, so they can hunker down and wait for those warm temperatures. The updated forecast for long term is looking at some warmer temperatures. So, I mean, they can speed through their development relatively quickly.
Resilient buggers. Okay, Shelley, what are you expecting? I know a lot of farmers in southern Alberta are very concerned about grasshoppers, but there's also those pesky gophers as well.
Well, gophers are out of my purview. I would expect we're going to see grasshoppers, just like Jim said, in southern Alberta, up the Saskatchewan-Alberta border. And in the piece, because it's a year ending in an odd number, I would expect that there may be some issues with Brunner's grasshopper in the piece. Grasshopper seems to follow a 2-year life cycle. So, yeah, an odd year in the Alberta piece means there could be some Brunner's there. For sure.
Okay. And John, what is Manitoba looking at?
Well, the two that are a bit more predictable are the flea beetles and the grasshoppers. We've had chronic high flea beetle populations for several years, and I just don't see that declining anytime soon. So I think it's advisable for farmers and agronomists just to anticipate high flea beetle populations and do whatever they can to try to get quick germination and quick early growth from the crop. Grasshoppers, as was mentioned, we also had good egg laying conditions. We do a survey late in the season. We look at adult grasshoppers and what their numbers are like during that egg laying period. And we had some, I'll say, moderate and maybe some areas high numbers last year. But as Jim mentioned, the conditions were very good for egg laying. So grasshoppers are certainly one that people have to have on their radar going into next year. The others are really hard to call because the aphids I mentioned, soybean aphid, as far as we know, doesn't overwinter in the Canadian prairies. And same with the English grain aphid and the oat bird cherry aphid. They're aphids that blow in. So you can have very different years back to back. Pea aphid does overwinter somewhat, but when we do get big problems with them, it's often that's augmented by populations that have blown in. So the aphids are a little bit harder to predict. And I'll just mention one more that we dealt with a little bit last year, lygus bugs. After several years where they really didn't make much of an appearance, we did have some spraying for lygus bugs last year, and they can successfully overwinter in the Canadian prairies as well. So they're another one just to keep on our radar for next year.
And are flea beetle populations just kind of like a given? Is that just we expect it at this point?
It's been that way for a while, actually. What's tricky with flea beetles, with some of the insects that we've covered, and we're probably getting into this, we've got some good natural enemies that once the pest gets high, the natural enemies will build their populations, take the pest down. You get these cycles. We just haven't been seeing that type of cycling with flea beetles. There isn't really a parasitoid or a few key predators that seem to be able to take their populations down, and they can overwinter well in the Canadian prairies. So, yeah, they've been almost flatlined at high level for quite a while.
Jim and Shelley, do you have any comments about flea beetles?
Ditto.
No, I just to John's point. I mean, we can count on relatively consistent pressure, and that's across the board. But I mean, we can get some variability. I mean, we've seen heavy flea beetle populations across canola growing regions in Saskatchewan. What was interesting from last year, though, was as many might be familiar with, we're seeing a bit of a shift or a replacement of crucifer flea beetle with striped flea beetle in a lot of canola growing regions, and that extends right down into the Dakotas. So, regions that typically didn't have any striped flea beetle there seemed to be stripe moving in, and the converse was actually apparent last year in the Saskatoon area, and the suspicion is that's associated with some of the hot, dry conditions. So striped flea beetle doesn't do as well in hot, dry conditions as crucifer flea beetle. And in the Saskatoon area, of course, it was very hot and dry in 2021, and that may have had a regulating effect on the striped flea beetles. With the snowpack that we have this year, I'm curious to see what happens with the striped flea beetle population, and the moisture associated with that, and the cool weather in the spring. Stay tuned to this channel. We'll an update.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong here. What I'm hearing is that even though it's been cold the end of March, bizarrely cold early April, if you're farming and thinking that this sort of insect issues for 2023 are over, it's going to this cold weather is going to kill them off and we're going to be fine. That is a false narrative. Absolutely.
Yeah, they are tough as nails. And part of the reason that they are as tough as they are, animals that live in this environment, is they use something called supercooling temperatures, or that is, they have proteins and or alcohols that they produce in their bodies that reduce the freezing temperature of their blood, their hemolymph. And when you're talking about grasshoppers, I mean, that can be very cold, minus 18. We've got some invasives that are less tough, and pea leaf weevil and cabbage seed pod weevil are considerably less cold hardy than some of the native species. But as a rule, they can really depress their freezing temperatures. And so it's not the cold that kills, it's crystal formation that kills. And if they can stop that ice from forming in their bodies and, tissue disruption, then Bob's your uncle. They're ready to go for the next season. So
great. Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind there, Shaun, is that we've got these super cold tolerant insects, but also beneath that snow, it's not all that cold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So even if it's still minus 20, say, above the snow, you have a couple inches of snow on the ground. It's probably barely below freezing where they are, and as Jim mentioned, they can survive some pretty cold temperatures. So you almost need next to no snow and wickedly cold temperatures to kill some of these pests. In the case of grasshopper eggs, you don't want conditions that will kill grasshopper eggs because you won't have any winter wheat surviving or alfalfa and things like that. So
that's interesting. If you had conditions that would kill off grasshoppers, you wouldn't have to worry about any crop. Yeah, it's the unfortunate balance of the ecosystem there for sure. And make sure you check out the Pest and Predator podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast. It's also in our Real Agriculture podcast, that main feed. When you go to Spotify or to Apple Podcast, okay? And you can also find it, of course, online at RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by WGRF. And that was James Tansey, John Gavloski, and Shelley Barkley talking to me. And you can hear that entire... there's more in that conversation, and you'll hear it in that episode. Let's take a break. When we come back, Wheat Pete's going to come in. And then him and I are going to listen to a conversation that Kara Oosterhuis had with Lyle Jensen of AgroPlus. We're going to talk about grasshoppers and get to a whole bunch more. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, and we're, of course, here on Sirius XM.
As you head out into the field this season, The Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
It's now time for a product spotlight, all about the Pest and Predator Podcast, brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grain Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. Joining me right now is Dr. John Gavloski. He's an entomologist with Manitoba Agriculture. Okay, we got another season of the Pest and Predator Podcast. John, what is the Pest and Predator Podcast, and what can listeners expect in what I can't believe is going to be season 4?
Yeah, it's a series of interviews with entomologists from across the prairies, and we're talking about pests and predators that are common in Western Canada. And what we'll be doing is we'll be bringing you the latest information on pests that you may encounter in your fields and the beneficials that help to control them. And with each episode, we feature a different entomologist on a different topic. Listeners will also learn about the role that beneficial insects can play in their fields, and ways that we can protect them, and some scouting tips.
And we are back here on Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio. This segment is brought to you by Alpine Premium Liquid Fertilizers for Canadian farmers. Over the past 50 years, Alpine has developed broad Canadian roots. We strive to maximize fertilizer efficiency to support our farmers and their communities with our quality liquid fertilizers from start to finish. To learn more, contact Alpine at alpinefl.com. Big thanks to Alpine for being on board with RealAg Radio. Let's bring him in here. It is Peter Wee Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how are you doing?
I'm awesome, thanks, Shaun. The weather has changed in Ontario. Oh my gosh, she's sunny. It's warm. I'm out in my shirt sleeves. I might even have to switch to shorts later on this week. It's looking like maybe we are going to get that window of opportunity that we've been waiting for the last 2 or maybe even 3 weeks to get back in the field.
Oh boy, those white legs. Woo!
Hey. I am proud of those white legs, man. It is a good day when I go home with white legs again.
Hey, good stuff. Hey, I talked about the beginning of the show, but your leaves. Ouch.
Ugh. Yes, yeah. Come on, leaves. What the heck? It's we're hoping now for a miracle, right? We're hoping now for a miracle. Dang. At least the Oilers are still in there. I know you're not a big Oilers fan, Shaun, but dang it, we need one Canadian team in there, and I hope there's still 2. But the Leafs really do need a miracle at this point.
Yeah, Vegas was throttled by the Oilers on Saturday. That wasn't even that game was never even ever in doubt. So yeah, Oilers scored early and often. So yeah,
it's what maybe the Leafs could follow that blueprint.
Well, and hey, follow the blueprint. Best players got to play best. Like Draisaitl's been insane. He's been so good. Okay, Pete, let's start off with a conversation. When we just heard from a Pest and Predator podcast, we heard some audio from James Tansey, John Gavloski, and Shelley Barkley talking about insect forecast for 23. Now, one of the big insects is getting a lot of attention because there's an expectation the population will be strong is grasshoppers this year on the prairies, which obviously can cause a lot of damage to the crop. Now, in a recent Wheat School episode, Kara Oosterhuis of Real Agriculture had a chance to catch up with Lyle Jensen of AgroPlus, which is a local ag retail, and they talked about scouting for grasshoppers and looking for grasshoppers in the seed row. Let's listen to that audio. Now, I should say the Wheat School is brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and Alberta Wheat Commission, so thanks to them. You can find all episodes of the Wheat School by going to wheatschool.com or finding it. Of course, there's a playlist also on our YouTube channel, so check that out. Let's listen to the conversation that Kara had with Lyle, and then Pete, we can talk about it.
We're here today to talk about early grasshopper feeding. Now, we are in southern Alberta, and you have recently scouted some actual grasshoppers hopping around in the field already. We are just approaching the beginning of May here. Do you want to talk about some of the things you've seen?
Yeah, there is a few adult grasshoppers around, although for the most part they are a kind of non-pest species that would not be really of any risk of causing economical damage unless the numbers are unusually high for some reason. Typically, the two-striped grasshopper around here is the one that we generally associate the most with crop injury, especially in cereals, but can also occur in pulses and canola as well. And right now, those are pretty much just in the egg stage. So I've gotten quite a few pictures from producers this week, as well as finding eggs myself in the seed row after the drill has disturbed the ground. And they'll kind of look like an off yellow grain of rice almost, and they're, of course, quite soft and squishy. And depending on when they hatch will kind of spell how much damage they could cause for the year. Temperature and moisture, of course, are going to be your determining factors for when those eggs will hatch. So right now it's still too early to say exactly when that is going to begin. Last spring they hatched fairly late in this area because of cold soil temperatures. So in a lot of cases the crop got a pretty good start on them. We didn't have a problem until kind of later in the season.
So what sort of temperatures do they actually need to hatch?
I believe it's 10 to 15 degrees would be where it would kind of start. Yeah.
So, and do these eggs overwinter? If you're seeing, you mentioned that you'd seen quite a few being laid in October of last year. They'll survive till the spring?
Oh yes, that is what they are designed to do. And because last year we didn't have a real killing frost event till the end of October, and even after that some of the grasshoppers did survive. So the egg laying period went on for a very long time last fall.
And do you just want to reiterate the importance of actually IDing your grasshopper? Because, like you said, the ones that you're seeing now aren't necessarily the ones that'll cause issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very important. For the most part, our grasshoppers are fairly distinctive, the ones that do cause economical damage. So if you see anything unusual, there's lots of great resources out there for identifying grasshoppers. I posted a picture of one on Twitter on Monday, and I believe it was identified in about 5 minutes flat. So there's definitely some people out there that are very good at identifying specific insects.
And now when it comes to seeing these actual eggs on the ground or in the seed row, can anything be done about it at this point?
Not a whole lot. No, there's as far as I know, there's nothing, no beneficial pest that you could economically apply to a field that would take care of it. Although they are going to be subject to, predation by things like ground beetles and other beneficial predators.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe just a bit of a warning to keep your eyes out and peeled.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can, depending on the weather and the temperature, they can hatch quite early. Several years ago, out near, it would have been Coaldale, there was a field of barley that had an extremely heavy hatch of two-striped grasshoppers at about the two-leaf stage, so fairly early in the season. And it was fortunate we caught it in time because that field went from green to brown really fast. There was hundreds per square meter.
And what kind of conditions do grasshoppers like, just to reiterate that there too?
Well, in that case, they definitely showed a preference for warm and sandy soil seeded to barley. Grasshoppers seem to have best success laying eggs in sandier soil, and as well as, ditches, roadsides, and pasture lands. Like here behind us, there is some pasture land here along the coulee, and that is usually kind of a prime territory for grasshopper reproduction, depending on the species.
That is Lyle Jensen of AgroPlus talking to RealAgriculture's Kara Oosterhuis. Pete, grasshoppers, I don't care, early or mid-season, they can create a lot of damage.
Yeah, there's just such a voracious pest, Shaun, and they're like a plague, right? You hear that they talk always about plagues of locusts. Well, grasshoppers are basically locusts, and they're a little different, but they act in the same way. And it's really interesting to listen to Lyle talk about, them when they're going to hatch. They had an extended season last fall in many areas, so they likely laid lots of eggs. And when you get lots of eggs, man, that puts you at higher risk. I'm a bit surprised that they don't, or Lyle didn't talk about a little bit more predictive tool. Like often we know, for example, alfalfa weevils that when we get up to, I believe it's 200 growing degree days, that the eggs will hatch. and that we should start looking for that feeding damage. And you they'll hatch between 200 growing degree days and I think 280 or something like that. I'd have to go back to my book to make sure, because I'm just pulling this off the top of my head. So be careful anytime I go by memory. But you would think that with grasshoppers, they could do the same thing, because timing that hatch is going to be really quite important to get out there and scout. And then the other thing for sure to remember is that it's soil temperature that drives that hatch. And so Lyle talked about the warm, sandy soil that got seeded into barley. Well, that soil temperature on a sand is almost for sure going to be at least a couple, often 3 or 4 degrees, maybe even as much as 5 degrees Celsius warmer than a heavy, wet clay. The clay is just going to stay cold longer. And so timing the hatch on those two different soil types, the sand is at much more risk. But if you're along the roadside or you have a bunch of grass where the grasshoppers can lay their eggs and survive well, boy, it would be good to kind of have that predictive tool.
Yeah, and the thing we also have to remember is scouting, right? So I can remember an example when I was younger. It was out on a Friday, a dryland field, 2-mile strips. And it was like, they're not that bad, not over any sort of threshold. There's a few jumping around, but I think we're okay. Went there Monday morning and they had wiped out like 3 to 5 rows, on a 2-mile strip of the crop. So, we need to stay on top of the scouting and at certain times of the year, especially early here, be monitoring the fields with a high level of frequency. Be out in those fields looking.
Well, and that's because there's less above ground plant materials for them to feed on, right, Shaun? In the early going, there's less there, and so they can eat the entire plant, like the entire field, right down to the ground very quickly. Later in the season, there's just more there for them to eat. And they can still wipe you out. I get that if the numbers are high enough, but it will take them a little bit longer. You maybe have a couple more days or 3 days in there to scout for them, because there's some leaf material for them to feed on before they totally wipe the crop out.
Yeah. Hey, Pete, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on Agronomic Monday. You're listening to RealAg Radio.
Join us for the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, August 15th to 17th at Calgary, Alberta. Spend time networking on the trade show floor, hear from keynote speakers, take in breakout sessions designed to increase profit, manage your rangeland, and navigate trends. Get up close to advanced techniques and hands-on demos, and experience bullfighting at the closing party. Proud, innovative, and loyal, we are beef. Registration is now open. Visit CanadianBeefIndustryConference.com for full details and to register.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. This segment is brought to you by Heads Up Seed Treatment. Protect your beans from rhizoctonia root rot, white mold, and SDS with Heads Up. Visit your nearest Agromart location or visit headsupst.com to learn more. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Make sure you download the newest episode of Wheat Pete's Word. New episode drops every single Wednesday, so you get Pete here on Agronomic Monday, and then you get him on Wednesday as well, where he answers your agronomic questions. Pete, I was out in my yard yesterday, okay, and mowed the grass and did some spraying of some weeds that were kind of in some of the beds. Dandelions. They are out, and wow, I'm reminded, why didn't I do more fall control of them? Because definitely difficult to deal with in the spring.
Shaun, I thought I had you indoctrinated into that. You've got to kill dandelions in the fall. And oh my goodness, they are in full flower here in southwestern Ontario. You can pick out the wheat fields that did not get fall weed control. Many of them showing way more dandelions than I would like. You can also pick out the older alfalfa fields, the older hay fields, because, man, I came past a couple of them today, and it's just a sea of yellow. It's a different color of yellow, but you'd almost think it was canola. It was that sea of yellow all through the field, and you just go, oh, my gosh. The upside is that dandelion leaves actually are fairly nutritious. The downside is that you never get many tons of dandelion leaves. Like, there's just, they grow low to the ground, and they don't put up much material, and it's dandelions are one of those weeds that when I see them in the spring, I just say, yikes, why did I not, or why did that grower not do something about them in the fall?
Well, I have this and this is in my backyard, so this isn't field scale, of course, but I have like one of those dandelion pullers, like where you put the thing in the ground and you kind of yank them out. And some of the roots, it is amazing how far down that dandelion root goes.
So, Shaun, if they're well established from last fall, not only can they go down quite a ways, but sometimes, like, I've seen them be at least 2 inches around in diameter.
Wow.
And like, I don't know how deep they went, but these dandelions, and we're starting to see this. I mean, gosh, for the growers listening in southwestern Ontario, once those dandelions start to flower, particularly the ones that were really well established last fall, they're getting to be the size of a pail. They're not quite bushel basket sized yet, but they're thick and dense, and the foliage growth is just about the size of one of those, I don't know what you would call it, 2.5 gallon pail or 10 liter pail, if you will. And man, oh man, the root is thick. And sometimes, like dandelion roots, they say can go at least 10 feet deep. So even when you take that little tool you have, you're not getting the whole root, that's for sure.
Did you just say 10 feet?
And, yeah, they can go as deep as 10 feet. I said that, yes.
Oh, my God.
So some people say they're compaction busters because they can put the roots down 10 feet. I just say they might alleviate a bit of compaction, but I ain't putting up with them. My God.
Okay, so now if you were somebody that didn't do the fall control, what are your options right now in crop?
So in winter wheat, there's almost none. The damage is done. I'm getting lots of questions. It's really interesting you asked me that, Shaun, because I had 4 or 5 people call me today. And here in southwestern Ontario, and it really varies because if I get down near, like the furthest south, we get down around Leamington, Essex County, man, that wheat is in flag leaf. If I get further north, I was up in Bruce County scouting wheat on Saturday, and that wheat is just barely first node, growth stage 31. So we have this massive difference. But man, there's lots of people who are saying, my wheat is just poking flag leaf, or it's, penultimate leaf. So the second leaf down is coming out of the whirl. You try to kill weeds at that stage, the damage is done. You can try to make those dandelions flower less just so that your neighbors don't think you're such a, that you messed up so badly. But as far as the crop itself, walk away from it. It's not going to improve yield at all. That ship has absolutely sailed. In fields where growers are doing burn downs, so, in the corn stalks, going to go out and burn down ahead of the soybeans or whatever crop that you're going to plant, once they start to flower, they are much tougher to control. And so that means that we have to start either adding more things to the tank or increasing the glyphosate rate. So we know that dandelions are rate sensitive to glyphosate, and typically 0.7 basically liters per acre of a 540 glyphosate formulation will kill them. And once they get to this stage, you really have to start upping that glyphosate rate, and they will die slow because they've got that big root. They have to get enough of that product down into the big root to actually kill it. And it'll take at least 2 weeks and sometimes longer.
Okay. Well, this is one of the things you write down to deal with in the fall, for sure. Hey, early beans. Talk about some of the emergence you've seen.
Yeah, so it's actually, I haven't seen any yet myself, but Warren Schneckenberger from Eastern Ontario tweeted, or maybe texted me a picture, I think he tweeted it, was 20 days from the time. So if you remember, Shaun, we had 1 week of good weather back in, I don't know, around the 10th of April, give or take, or I think actually it was the 9th to the 15th of April. We had some 26, 28 degree days. It was like summer. And some people planted a lot of crop. Most people sat on their hands. And the odd person like Warren just went out and said, let's make sure everything's working, and put a few acres in. And he planted a few soybeans. And those soybeans emerged 20 days after he put them in the ground. And so they made it. And I think soybeans will be okay. I'm a little more worried. I have yet to hear of any corn emerging. All of the spring cereals, the spring barley, the spring wheat that got seeded in that window, it's all up, and it looks gorgeous because spring cereals are a base 0 crop. They take that cold weather. Corn is a base 10 crop, and the corn that got in, you bring up a good point. I should drive past some of the stuff that I know got planted and see where it's at. But I've seen no Twitter pictures to suggest that's up yet.
Okay, speaking of early seeding, you got an update from, I believe it's Daniel in Saskatchewan that was doing some dormant seeded wheat this year. Any update on that?
Yeah, so really cool. It actually tagged in Brian Barris from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada out of Lethbridge there, and he's doing the ultra early seeding, and he was most interested because Daniel seeded on October the 30th, and that wheat, as of last Friday, he said was 12 days ahead of the hard red spring wheat he seeded this spring, and the stand looked phenomenal. It all came up. Brian asked him about seed treatment because we know that the neonicotinoid insecticides can help plants overcome stress. And so Brian was wondering, did you put a neonic on and did that help it survive the stress of the winter? And no, Daniel did not. It was fungicide only. And to be, 9, 10, 11, 12 days ahead of the earliest you could be, that's awesome. That's amazing. That's cool. And he also, by the way, Shaun, has winter wheat planted beside it. So we're going to get that comparison as well. So just such fun stuff from that standpoint.
Wow. That's amazing. Like there might be some patches of winter kill, but the stand looks great.
From what he said that, like, he didn't talk at all about anything that didn't make it. It all looked like it was there. He sent tweeted a picture of the field, and you looking down the field, and I think that's what got Brian so excited. It looked phenomenal.
Oh, cool. That's neat stuff. Hey, Pete, we got to take a break. When we come back, we'll finish up Agronomic Monday. You're listening to RealAg Radio.
ABJ Agri-Products is North America's exclusive distributor for air bubble jets and easy jets. These sprayer nozzles reduce the number of driftable droplets and at the same time maintain a uniform droplet size, primarily between 300 and 400 micron, ensuring more even dispersion of your chemical products, providing reduced drift and increased plant coverage. Let us help improve your spraying operation by visiting abjagra.com. That's abjagri.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Welcome back to Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio. This segment's sponsored by Koch Agronomic Services. Now, they're the makers of Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer. Protect your UAN from all three forms of nitrogen loss. Learn more about Tribune and other nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement solutions at kochagronomicservices.ca. That's Koch, K-O-C-H, agronomicservices.ca. We are joined and finishing up Agronomic Monday here with Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Make sure you do download that next episode of Wheat Pete's Word that comes out on Wednesday. Pete. Pat Johnson. How's it going, Pat?
Yes. Yeah, it's all good, man. If that's the worst you ever call me, I'm in good shape.
Exactly. Okay, Pete. Canopio app. Now, this is kind of cool. I have never seen this before, and it's a very kind of a cool, easy way to measure greenness in comparing the amount of green to the brown component that you're hovering over top of with this app. So, talk about what it does and why.
Yeah, so it's actually developed by Oklahoma State. It's a really cool app. We've used it in our research plots for a few years now, and so it's Canopio. So if growers want to play around with it, it's free. You just download it off the internet, but it's Canopeo. And all you do is you take your phone and you hold it over top of the wheat crop or any crop. It can do soybeans. All it's doing is measuring canopy reflectance, like how much green material is actually there, and take a picture. And then it will give you the amount of interception or the percentage of that area that is crop leaves intercepting sunlight versus the amount of brown that is soil where the sunlight is hitting bare dirt and not doing you any good. And so when you're doing different treatments in a research situation, it's just a really cool way to kind of walk through and say, is there a difference in this treatment? Are we seeing, differences in growth, differences in tillering, differences in emergence, all of those different things? And some of the numbers are really neat. I did my own yen. We're actually using it in the yen plots now. And so that's the Yield Enhancement Network in wheat here in Great Lakes yen, here in Ontario, Michigan, Ohio. And in the low spots, so in the better areas of the field, I was getting about, I think, 63% green material. When I went up on the knolls, and these aren't big knolls, but when I went up on the knolls, there was 17% less. I think I was at 46% green material in that. And you kind of go, wow, you'd think this field is fairly uniform, but yet we're getting those kind of differences. And it really shows that, man, if I could, I have to figure out how to build those knolls up so they'll produce like the hollows. And there's lots of cool stuff you can do with it. It's fun.
Yeah, very, very neat. Do you have any other cool apps like that are, easy to use and serve like a really, really kind of cool evaluation process?
So that's the main one that I use. There are some other ones out there, and everyone is a little bit different. So there's lots of stuff you can play around with. There's some apps out there that will give you residue cover over bare soil, so you have some idea from erosion potential. But this Canopio app, particularly for the research that we do, but actually growers as well, you don't realize how much variability you have in your field. And so the other thing you can do from a trial perspective, and Paul Hermans from Pioneer has a winter wheat plot where the grower, I guess, turns the map off, the phosphorus, right? Shaun, you know that Johnson Wheat Pete is the poster boy, the absolute poster boy for phosphorus on wheat in the fall or when you seed in the spring. I don't care. There's three nutrients that a wheat plant needs early. It's called phosphorus, phosphorus, and phosphorus. Man, where they turned that off, he had great pictures. You can go on Twitter and see them. But with the phosphorus, the winter wheat is 10 inches high. Without the phosphorus, 6 inches high. When he did the Canopio app with phosphorus, 47% ground cover. Without phosphorus, 17%, right? So we're actually a 30% difference in the amount of leaf tissue that we have just based on phosphorus. If you go, if that isn't an advertisement for phosphorus on wheat, I don't know what is.
And that's the same for spring wheat versus winter wheat, right? They both need phosphorus of the same kind of manner?
Absolutely. I mean, winter wheat maybe needs it a little bit worse because it's going into the winter, so it's trying to grow as things get cooler and cooler and cooler, and phosphorus gets less and less and less available. But wheat in general terms has a high demand for phosphorus in the early growth stages, and we see excellent response to phosphorus on spring wheat just like we do in winter wheat, 100%.
How much phosphorus does, there's a lot of people, there's people putting in spring wheat right now, and they're like, okay, well, I'm putting phosphorus down. How much phosphorus does a spring wheat crop need?
So it's all based on yield, right? And when you say how much phosphorus does a spring wheat crop need, well, there's some science out there from actually the early 1980s that says that a wheat crop, a good wheat crop, in the first 30 days of growth needs to take 15 pounds of phosphorus up out of the soil. And if you look at removal, I mean, if you have a 100 bushel wheat crop, then you are typically removing about 55 pounds of phosphorus in the grain only, and uptake is higher than that. So when you say how much does that spring wheat crop need, well, what's the yield? How much biomass are you making? But man, you got to have phosphorus in the soil. You need phosphorus that's cycling. We talk about carbon cycling. Well, when carbon cycles, nutrients cycle as well, and you need that phosphorus. But that early demand, that 15 pounds in the first 30 days of growth, when the wheat crop really has very few roots, that's why a band of phosphorus is so critical. Whether it's winter wheat or spring wheat, it really does make the difference.
Okay, we got just over a minute here left. I wanted to hit on David from the UK and hexagonal planting of wheat. What exactly is this?
So this is back to the yen. This is the A-yen, the UK yen. And David tagged both Dennis Pennington from Michigan and Peter Johnson from, Wheat Pete from Canada in. And they are going to incredible lengths to determine if they can increase wheat yields. And so they're seeding individual seeds in the field in a hexagonal pattern so that each plant gets maximum area around it, not to compete with the other plants. He's done some work. He's done some work with 5-inch wheat planted at right angles, and he's seen some pretty significant increases in test weight and 1,000 kernel weight, like some of those measures, and some yield boost. But yeah, this is really cool stuff, and cool that he tagged us in. What is a hexagonal pattern? Well, you just think about a hexagon, right? Mm-hmm. Hex is 8, so you just take the 8 sides, and at each point you plant a seed, and you just get that, and they just fit together all the way through, and so you always have that pattern as you plant the wheat. It's doing things differently. It'd be fun to follow that one and see what some of the results are here this year. Hey, Pete. I said hex was 8, it's 6. What was I thinking? Hex is 6, John. That's how they fit together. Sorry. I'm glad we got that sorted out. Hey, Pete, have yourself a great week, okay? Thanks. You too, Shaun. It's been a blast. That is Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Make sure you give him also a follow on Twitter @WheatPete. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call that RealAg feedback line. The number is 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we'll, of course, chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode of RealAg Radio, brought to you by Ag Expert. Go from field to farm with Canada's most trusted, most secure farm management software. Ag Expert keeps you on top of it all, no matter where you are. Get started for free at agexpert.ca.